Okay, we have a house full of guests here this morning. The Montana World Affairs. Thank you, Bob.
My pleasure.
Bob Seidenschwartz is right over there. We've got John King right over there. Good morning, Mr. King.
Hey, good morning, Peter.
And a house full of guests.
And this is not a house of cards.
Okay.
Okay?
Unless we all start to be funny. Then.
Right. And we're not funny.
That did sound like a wild card statement, actually.
Okay, so we've got Haley Smith and Christina Atwood joining us in studio with the Qatar Foundation International, right? Did I get it right?
I'm going to reconfigure that Qatar.
Qatar. It's Qatar.
Or Qatar or Qatar. Or maybe we can have our Arab experts, Haley, actually pronounce this here.
Anytime I want to say it, I'll just point it to you.
Yeah.
How's that? Okay.
I think we say Qatar, Peter.
Qatar Peter. Okay, well, we'll call it Qatar Peter from now on. All right. Just kidding. All right, welcome, everybody. It's good to have you guys with us. So, Bob, take it away.
Well, I want to welcome our guests here to Missoula. Thank you guys for coming up here. Very special event, both today and tomorrow. So we've got a program Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the Doubletree, which is going to be discussing global refugee crisis. And, of course, how does that affect us here in Missoula? We've had, issues regarding resettlement, and we've had a lot of different views and controversy regarding this. So we have two people here that are on the ground and actually have the experience to talk about both what is it like to be going through the process, refugee resettlement, the regulatory side of it, and of course they both have very fascinating and interesting stories in terms of what brought them to this point in their life. So I'd like to have Haley, please, if you would, tell us a little bit about how did you come to this point where you are here joining us in Missoula and your background and experience.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Haley Smith, and I am the director and founder of Lifting Hands International. It's a small grassroots nonprofit organization that's more like a movement, trying to get communities involved in helping refugees. I got my start in a really kind of roundabout, random way. I studied Arabic at Brigham Young University, got my master's in Middle Eastern Studies at University of London, and I was planning on working for the government because I just wanted a job, and it seemed like speaking Arabic would get me a job. And I graduated from my master's right during the recession and couldn't find a job. And so I ended up being a teacher, which was incredible. I ended up in Boston Public Schools, which was such a great experience. I was there for 5 years teaching middle school, and then the last 2 years I taught Arabic at a public school in Boston, and it was a wonderful experience.
So you, there's a story that is not unlike when we had Mary Poole from Soft Landing on the show. What was the spark for you that you said, hey, what's going on in the world, or were you, aware? So tell us a little bit about what actually happened for you personally.
Personally, I felt the need to move away from Boston and be closer to my family, and it was a really hard decision because I loved teaching. I loved my students so much. I ended up moving to Arizona and getting an office job, so I was no longer teaching, and I had a lot more time to think and a lot more time to read the news. And I was embarrassed I'm embarrassed to admit that I was kind of just being so busy teaching, I had lost track of the news and lost track of the Syrian civil war, which I had been just focusing on passionately, but I lost track of it. And so, like so many other people in our country, the picture of the little boy that had drowned and washed up on the Turkish beach really affected me and affected me deeply. So I found out.
Can I jump into real quick question? For those in our audience that have heard, day after day after day or month after month about the Syrian civil war, you seem to have a pretty good knowledge of it. Can you kind of explain what it's about? I mean, for folks who just listen on the periphery.
Absolutely. One thing that people might misunderstand is a lot of people say, well, why can't they just stop killing each other? Like, why does that religion keep killing each other? It's not a religious war. That's a really important thing to understand. In 2011, a revolutionary movement, kind of a revolutionary spirit, swept across the Arab world, North Africa. It started in Tunisia, and it just spread to Morocco. It spread to Libya, Egypt, called the Arab Spring.
Arab Spring, right.
The Arab Spring. And Syria also got caught up in that revolutionary spirit. And it started a lot, sounds strange, but it started a lot like World War I, where World War I, a very kind of small-ish incident leads to a huge thing, like the assassination of not even, he's just a diplomat. He wasn't even a politician, just a diplomat, leads to World War I. Kind of the same thing where you have a teenage boy in Syria, a 15-year-old teenage boy, writing a slogan on the wall of his schoolyard. Says, "Your turn is next, doctor." Assad, he's an eye doctor. He and his friends get arrested and tortured. And the community from where he's from protests that he's being tortured, obviously. And government snipers kill several people during that protest. Leads to more protests, leads to more killings, leads to more protests. All of a sudden you have a civil war. A few years later, because of this destabilization, ISIS takes advantage of that destabilization, comes up from Iraq, takes advantage of that, and all of a sudden it becomes kind of a war between three big factors. You have the Free Syrian Army, you have ISIS, and you have the regime, and then Russia joins, and then Iran joins. And so it's not just a simple war where two people or two parties are fighting each other, it's several factions. And within the Free Syrian Army, you have several factions. Within the regime, you have different classifications. It's a messy, messy war. And it's half of the population is now it's displaced.
Right.
Half of Syria is displaced. Half of those are outside of Syria.
So now so let's go back. You're in Arizona and you're keeping track of the Civil War. Then what?
Well, I knew that Syria was draining. The people were draining outside into Lebanon, into Jordan, into Iraq, the neighboring countries. What I didn't know is that people were starting to go from Turkey to Greece. And then that's when it really started hitting the Western news, is when it started, when people were starting to go to Europe. And so I saw the little boy, Ilan, that's his name, washed up on the shore, drowned. And I was like, I have to know more. What is happening? Why are people getting into these little rubber boats and crossing from Turkey to Greece? Why aren't they just going across? Because Turkey is connected to Europe by land. Why aren't they just walking across and just fording the river there and then getting to Europe? And then realizing that Bulgaria had closed its borders, and that the only choice people have is either stay in Turkey, where they don't have any choice, there's no chance for education or jobs or anything. In fact, you basically have to bribe people just to even get into a camp and even to have a tent there. And people who did go to Turkey, the Syrians who went to Turkey, they really thought they'd be able to go back to Syria. And as the war continued, they realized either we stay here and we don't progress in our lives, because we're not going back home, or we're going to have to go to Europe, where we can actually have some sort of life.
Now, of course, the refugee issue is spread all the way over here, far from Turkey and Greece to the United States, with individuals seeking refuge here. And I guess my question is, why so far flung? Why is that region of the world outside of Syria having such a difficult time managing the population flow, and even beyond that into Europe, et cetera?
If you can hang on to that question, we're up against our first break. So hang on, we're going to come right back. 721-1290. We have all four lines open. If you'd like to visit with Haley or Christina or John or Bob or even me, 721-1290 is our number. We'd love to hear from you. This is Talkback, the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. 721-1290. This is Talkback, the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Just a house full of people here today. Bob Seidenschwartz with the Montana World Affairs Council. I've been having a conversation with Haley Smith, and John is busy answering the phones. We already have the phones are starting to fill up. By the way, when all four of our phone lines fill up, you guys get a T-shirt. You're officially a rock star. So, so you were going to ask Haley.
Yeah, we're into a complicated subject right now when you're talking about that entire region, and John was asking questions about why has this happened, and we've had many a conversation on this show about the players. So it's
and you talked about the refugee crisis.
Refugee crisis.
One would presume every time there's a refugee, there's a crisis, right? So, but this season of refugee crises seems to be at a higher level than things we've experienced.
It's the largest refugee crisis since World War II. To put it in perspective, when you're looking at the European continent, Middle East, and countries where this is taking place during the Second World War, this is the largest contingent of refugees that we've had to deal with. And it's not just Syria in the Middle East. You're talking about North Africa, failed states like the Sudan, Libya. So, the complexity of this goes very deep and is very broad, goes very far.
Okay, so Haley, you were right in the middle of a story. Before we get to our callers, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had this office job, and I had more time to read up about what was happening. At the time that I kind of discovered what was happening, about several thousand Syrians and Iraqis and Afghans Afghanis, were crossing the Aegean to Lesvos, this island just about 12, 13 miles across from Turkey. Actually, if you look at a map, it looks like it's part of Turkey. It's about 10 hours by ferry to the mainland of Greece. So I decided I'm going to go over there. I'm going to see what's going on. I speak Arabic, and there's also just a need for translators over there. And so I went. I spent 2 weeks over Christmas 2015, so just over a year ago. Spent 2 weeks on Lesvos translating in a camp called Moria, kind of like the Mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings. It's not that different. Not that different.
Are there Balrogs?
A little bit. So 2 weeks there where it's a registration camp, not a refugee camp. So when the refugees at that time, when they landed on the island, they would register with Frontex, and that's kind of the border control of Europe. They would register, and then they would immediately move on to the ferries, go to Athens. From Athens, they would just get on a bus and then go to their final destination, be it Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, the countries that have open borders. And for a while, for about a million worth, that's how many people crossed over and entered Europe that way. I was there during just thousands of people were crossing over, and so it was overwhelming. The wait to get registered was several days long, and so people would just sleep on the ground. This is December, January. It was freezing. There was not enough tents, not enough blankets, but people were just so happy to be there. They still had so much hope. Here we are. We've made it. And once they get on the ferry, that's the first on the massive they're just the trip all the way to Germany, or their final destination.
So I want to bring, we got some callers we'll have to get to, but I want to bring Christine in here because I think one of the real issues that people are baffled by is what process do you have to go through? So as Haley's talking about, you leave Syria, you get to Turkey, you wind up in Greece. There's some very strict rules along the way that defines what your next step is and what happens each step of the way. So to make a distinction between immigrants, and refugees, there's a major distinction, correct?
Correct.
So, Christina, I'll ask Peter here if he wants to get to a couple of the callers at first.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Christina.
Please, if you would, Christina.
Okay, well, first, one piece of that story that Haley hadn't quite got to was that the borders closed. So once the borders closed in Europe, then you've got camps that are being created in Greece and in other countries. So what a lot of people don't understand is that when we receive refugees, they're coming through the United Nations, and there's a very long process that's involved. A lot of people think that refugees can say, hey, I want to sign up, send me to America or somewhere. And that's absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. What happens is there's an investigator or people that take information as they log into a camp, and those people give information, and the UN is taking that information and putting it on a scale. And what they're searching for is the vulnerability of those people. And only the most vulnerable are the ones that would be considered for resettlement, and that's less than 1% that will be ever resettled.
And what defines that vulnerability?
So vulnerability assessments include women and girls at risk, people that have been victims of torture and violence, family reunification, and medical. Those are the four major categories for your vulnerability assessment.
So were there very few men that are involved in that, or is it primarily just women and children? Or do they try to keep families intact when they go?
They do. They try to keep families intact, although you will see, for instance, there was a family I read about last night that the family was given their approval. They were to come to the U.S., and their oldest daughter, who was an adult, wasn't allowed to come with them. And so there was this concern. They thought that she would be able to travel with them, and she wasn't able to. And so the ban was put into place, and then they don't have their daughter with them, and they've got this great concern about her being there by herself because she had given away all of her blankets and those items thinking that she was going to get to go. So there was quite a concern for some time with that family about being reunified.
Okay, so strap on your headphones. Let's get one of our callers. Let's get, this is Ben. Ben, you're the first caller this morning on Talkback. Thank you for calling. What's on your mind? What's your question?
My question is for Haley. I know that throughout history we've had numerous refugee crises, I guess we would say. And in the future, throughout the world will continue to have unrest and refugee crises. And so what always becomes my curiosity when we have situations like this is, where do we draw the line, and why are we trying to save all of the world's people and not take care of our own here in the U.S.? We have so many problems with people that are homeless, people that are already living on our social services, and I know that when we bring these refugees in, a large portion of them end up on our social services.
So Ben, you've got a series of great questions there. So let's let Christina and Haley kind of take those questions one by one.
Especially since we're up against a break. So,
right.
And thanks for your call, Ben. We'll address that when we come right back after this time out. And we're going to get Dave's call as well. But we have another hour with these folks from 9 until 10. So if you can't get through, give us a call, 721-1290. Yeah, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, and we just had a gentleman ask a question about why can't we just take care of our own? What about social services and the cost to the people in this country? So I know we have about 3 minutes before we have to take our hard break. So which one of you wants to jump in there and just kind of get the foundation laid on this question?
Well, I'm gonna talk about our global obligations.
Okay.
So the United States signed the Geneva Convention. We also have a Federal Refugee Act of 1980. We have global obligations to help. If we want, I'm going to have Christina talk about the resettlement process in the United States, because I personally believe that the United States we're going to be a leader in the world. We have to take refugees. That is part of our global responsibility. Christina's going to talk about the resettlement within the United States. Refugees don't get as many services as people might think. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings. And, so take it away, Christina.
Okay, Christina, go ahead.
So one thing that a lot of people might not be aware of is that when they arrive, they actually get a bill from the U.S. government for their airfare that
Really?
they need to start paying back after 90 days. They're given 90 days to resettle, and then they're expected to start to provide for themselves. And so in that time, they have a lot of different appointments. They have to be at DES. They have to be at all these, they need English classes. They need instruction from police officers and different groups that'll come in and help them with that adjustment and teach them about our country and what's acceptable, what's not. And so a lot of people are misunderstanding that they are this huge drain on our economy, when if you look at the statistics, these people go on to be very much wanting to give back to this country that is giving them a chance at life. And these are people who are the most vulnerable in the world. So it's not like I said before, they can sign up to come here. They don't get to choose which country they come to. And when they come, so the UN does a vetting process, and then the U.S. does a vetting process. There's 8 U.S. federal agencies that go over their information. There's 6 different security databases searched, 5 separate background checks, 4 biometric security checks, 3 separate in-person interviews, and 2 interagency security checks. These people are the most vetted people that come in any way to the United States.
And Christina, we do take, though, compared to any other country, as a percentage of refugees, we do take the
United States
majority
takes the most.
Versus any other country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're a leader in it.
Right.
Now, is that particularly because we have the largest landmass, or just the most opportunity here, or just we're the nicest? I know that sounds like a silly question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would say our global resources. I would say our involvement on a national scale is what really kind of dictates that.
Okay, we're up against our break. Go ahead, John.
Plus, usually we're pretty good at incorporating different people groups.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Right.
Anyway, so we're going to take a break. We'll come back. We have another hour to spend with these nice folks, and so we have Dave and Lance and Mark. If you guys don't mind waiting through the break, we'd appreciate it. We want to get your questions answered as quickly as we can. We'll be right back with more of Talk Back after this quick timeout for top of the hour news. The Montana World Affairs Council on the radio continues. Go ahead, John. We have Bob Seidenschwartz. We have guests in studio. Go ahead.
Well, I'm afraid that I know more about the conundrum that is Syria than I do about Lifting Hands International after our first half hour. And I was hoping maybe you could kind of tell us what you do at Lifting Hands International. When I went to your website this morning, I noticed one of the big, bold lines is that you are not a political movement.
Absolutely not.
So what do you do?
We're just an army of volunteers. And the fact is, refugees are coming to the United States, whether you like it or not, and we are going to help them. And it has been an amazing experience. So what we have a local program in Phoenix.
Do me a favor, would you?
Yeah.
Come over to this microphone right here. There's a terrible hiss in this one. So go ahead. So just go ahead. Say exactly what you're saying.
We'll tell Bobby got booted.
Yeah.
There you go.
Go ahead.
And we have an international arm. So we have a team in Greece that is based in a camp of 500 Yazidis from Iraq. And we provide a lot of aid in that camp and also different camps. There's 36 camps, official camps, and then several unofficial camps, meaning squats, abandoned buildings where refugees live, because there are 65,000 refugees trapped in Greece right now. So we provide a lot of services for them. If we don't, they don't eat, and that's unacceptable.
So why is there a need for you? I mean, that's what a lot of people are probably wondering. Why isn't my government doing this, or the other governments, or the UN, or I don't know, some other group of people? Why do these independent grassroots organizations have to come in and fill the void?
It's a really good question, and that's actually a question I ask myself a lot, and the only answer I come back to is, why has this humanitarian crisis become such a political crisis? Why has the word refugee become such an inflammatory word? People are fleeing their country because they absolutely have to, and it's not just Syria. It's Syria, it's Iraq, it's Afghanistan, it's Pakistan, and it's become such a political issue. And so instead of focusing on the politics, we are helping the people that have already left, and the ones that are starving, don't have food, don't have what they need to survive.
So when you ask the question, why has it become such a political issue, it seems to me that the answer most people have is just the size of the movement. And there's people that feel like their local cultures might change, or that the way that the country that they grew up in might change. At least that's the tenor that I get from people that live in Germany, friends of mine there, or when I hear people in America are afraid. In fact, at our local legislature here, we had a bill to stop Sharia law in the state of Montana. Like, people in these countries are worried about a change in culture brought in from outsiders, in this case, Muslim majority countries, and that might be brought in by these refugees. I mean, I think that's the concern from a lot of people.
People don't understand that Syria has a very, very light version of Islam. There are so many versions of Islam. There is not just one Islam light.
Okay.
You have a lot of people, when they think of Islam, they think of Saudi Arabia. They think of women not being able to drive. They think of women having to cover up. That's only Saudi Arabia. You have 24 countries, Arab countries, and you have 2 billion Muslims all over the world. And we are concerned about one country, kind of that's how people think about it. Syria, the Islam in Syria is very light. There's a lot of Muslims there that drink alcohol. Alcohol is forbidden in Islam, but they still do. They're still practicing Muslims. And so most of the Syrian, and also education, university is extremely important in Syria and Lebanon, in that area. And most of the Arab world and Muslim world. So anyway, I got off track.
Okay, so grab the headphones, because I want to get one of our callers on, so you can put those on right there. Yeah, Haley, okay. Let's get Dave on the line. Dave, you've been holding the longest. Thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. About Syria itself, now, from what I can gather, the Russians and the Iranians have keeping Assad in power. Without their help, he would have long since been gone and the war would be done. But, I'm curious to know, what do you think will be the solution? Will the war go on only underground, guerrilla activity after the rebels no longer hold any land, and I'm wondering if the Russians and the Iranians are happy with all of these people leaving the country.
I got to tell you, Dave, you're asking the wrong person about that. But go ahead, Bob. But thanks for the call.
Yeah, Dave, you have to ask really a question like that in the morning. This is what the Trump administration is going to have to be wrestling with, and it was a legacy left from the Obama administration. Right now, the Russians have taken advantage of the void that has and does exist within Syria. The Iranians have been supporting militia groups. You've got Hezbollah. You've got factions within Lebanon. That it's truly a dog's breakfast at this moment. And the U.S. has, at the current time, taken a step back. There's a port in Syria that's a warm water port that's very important to the Russians. They've always had access to that. That's going to continue to be expanded. So if you look at the moment, it's pretty clear that the Russians are there for the long term. Now, life and the world changes pretty quickly. So at the current time, Dave, Assad is going to be and will stay in power with support of Iran, with support of Russia, because this helps for their own geopolitical purposes as far as their hegemony in that region.
Well, and plus, I think that the other difficulty is, and actually I think this does play into the refugee issue, is that when you talk about the people that are in the Free Syrian Army, it's a harder group to nail down than the other two sides. It's much easier to see who's waving the black flags of ISIS and who's claiming to defend Assad, but this intergroup, the group of the rebels, it seems harder to distinguish the colors of the flags or the sides that people are fighting on.
Haley mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different players in the game here, and I think I can say with some accuracy that the previous administration and currently not that unhappy about letting the Russians and the Iranians do some of the dirty work right now, especially as it relates to ISIS. We do not want to be sending troops there. We don't want to have to spend the capital. So, this is the grand game that's been played for centuries.
Okay, we're going to come right back. We have Lance and Steve and John's on the phone with somebody else. The girls already have their T-shirts. We're going to come right back with more of Talk Back in a moment. Love to have your calls on the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Okay, we're back on Talkback, 721-1290, and I'm going to get Haley back on the microphone here. I know one of the things you really wanted to talk about is the group, it's called Lifting Hands International. Where did the idea come from, and why you?
Okay, so when I was in Greece in Christmas of 2015, I saw a lot of things that I can't unsee, and I decided I'm going to help somehow, just little me. And one of the things I saw is in this camp, this registration camp, was just overrun because so many people were coming over. And I got to meet some of the most incredible people, some of the refugees. But one experience really stands out, and that is one day I was volunteering in the clothing tent. It was kind of a small tent that had several boxes in the back room of donated clothing, boxes that were donated from Germany, France, I don't know where they came from. And all of a sudden we got a call saying 2 busloads of soaking wet refugees are going to come and you need to clothe them. They had overturned in the Aegean, and some of them have drowned, and they were coming straight to the registration camp in order to get clothed. So about 10 minutes later, they show up, old men, young babies, families, shivering because it's freezing and they are soaking wet. And there were only about 3 of us in this clothing tent trying to desperately clothe these people and get them dry clothes. It was taking too long. They were standing outside in the line, freezing. This very old man, his chin was just quivering violently. And so what we did is we emptied out some residential tents and had the women go into one tent and the men in one tent. And we had them strip their clothing because it was too cold. And we threw some blankets in there and had them bundle up in blankets. And they were in there for hours because it took us so long to clothe them. And one of the reasons it took so long is because the donations that came, they were not sorted before they came, and they were not the appropriate clothing. We were pulling out lingerie, we were pulling out bikinis, high heels, and then you'd open one box and it would be children's toys. And it turns out that the clothing tent, all the boxes in the clothing tent, didn't have nearly enough clothing that we needed just for these probably one boatload of people who would come in. And I decided there has to be a change. If we're going to have a refugee crisis on this scale, if we're going to be clothing and feeding people on this scale, we need to be prepared. And so I decided when I came back to the United States that we are going to fill containers of items that you actually need and items that is pre-sorted, that when something like this happens and there's a volunteer like me who is desperately trying to clothe people who have lost everything, then we can do it quickly and efficiently and they can move on with their lives. And the biggest thing about that experience is I held up a sweater to this one woman and it didn't fit her. And I said, I'm just so sorry, we don't have what you need. And she just looked at me and she said, oh, don't worry, honey. Like, I've seen death. This is nothing to me. And that is kind of the attitude that I have in this past year of working with refugees. In the past 12 years of working with Arabs in the Middle East, their attitude is an optimistic attitude. And no matter what they're going through, they still hold on to hope. And so that is something that I want to emphasize with listeners, is that's why we started. We're not a political organization. We're not policymakers. We do this because we help those who have lost everything. And that is something we lose sight of because it's become such a political situation, such a political hot topic, that we forget that these are people, millions of people who have lost everything, and they have not chosen this. They have not chosen. They have been forced to leave home. It's either they stay home and die, or they leave and face a very unknown future. And especially for them, this journey has been incredibly difficult. And that is something that I am passionate about. And there was a comment on Facebook saying that I will regret what I'm doing. And I'm telling you, and I...
We'll get to that. I'll read it out. So
okay.
But before you get to that, I wanted to ask you about, so you started this new organization, Lifting Hands International, obviously to fill gaps that you saw in the system.
Yes.
I was hoping maybe you could just highlight for us what the gaps are that you're seeking to fill. Is it
Absolutely.
financing? Is it people on the ground? Is it raw materials? Is it understanding? Is it knowledge? I mean, what sort of things do you think that Lifting Hands International brings to the table that wasn't there before?
Initially, the biggest need, and this is something that might sound weird, is that there was not enough men's items. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's because there's too many men. There's too many single men fleeing their countries. No, it's because people aren't sending men's items. And that's why. There are dads and brothers and sons at that camp who did not have socks or underwear or shirts or jeans or anything for days because people don't send them. And that's natural. You think about refugee camps and you think about women and children. And so there's an excess of things for children, and then there's a few things for women, and there's nothing for men. And so our first container to camps was full of men's items because there's not enough. And that's just scratching the surface of the need. The need is infinite. Even in Greece right now, is the number one item that is needed is fresh food. And people will say, well, why don't you plant gardens? Why don't you do this? It's because we can't yet. And the laws prohibit us from doing that. And so we can't really work on permanent solutions until people are fed and clothed. And that's still not happening. And of course, we can talk about the problems and the reasons behind that, but that's not what we're focusing on.
Wait, can you explain to people, because they probably don't understand, why can't you plant a garden? Why is
Let's
it illegal
just say
to
that there's a
plant
lot of red tape in that country. There's 65,000 people trapped in March.
But Greece has such a great economy. I don't
Yeah.
understand why they can't get their act together.
That was
Yeah.
that was funny.
So really, it is just if another country had been chosen as the docking point for the refugee crisis, do you think things would be much better?
Yes.
Okay, so Greece
Absolutely.
Greece is not your number one choice. All right, strap on your headphones. Let's try to get a call in before we take our first break of the hour, because Lance has been waiting very patiently for a long time. Lance, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just going off of Ben, the first caller's question or comment, and to better the future for all, even for refugees. Again, as we all know, refugees is a created crisis of war, civil war, and civil war is created. And a lot of people don't understand that these refugees are allies of war to the American politics. I'm going to put it that way. But to stop refugee crisis, and just America being one of the developed countries, just need to stop creating civil war in these poor/undeveloped countries that's creating this refugee crisis, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, thanks for the call, Lance.
So he was saying that America created the civil war in Syria? Is that
America helped to foment it, I think.
I think he's talking about the fact, and we were having this discussion off air, that policies that we are directly impacting can cause some of the issues that we're dealing with now, such as when we pulled out of Iraq. After, Bush is done, Obama comes in, we had troops there, and very shortly,
in Missoula has a finger on voting Assad into power.
No, and look, I'm not going to say this. Assad, even if there was not a civil war as we see right now, Assad was a problem. Assad was an oppressive regime.
Pre-ISIS problem.
Pre-ISIS problem. This could have still exploded separate from anything else possibly we were doing. But when you start looking at the totality of what happens, you add to it and you take away in different ways.
Okay, we're up against a break. 721-1290 is our number. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, when we get back, we've got some Facebook comments I know Haley wants to get into, and we'll read some of those, and we'll get the responses as soon as we get back.
We also have Steve and Jim, and we're trying to get as many calls in as we can. This is a very provocative topic, and it deserves your full attention. So when you listen, try to listen with open mind, open heart, and make your decisions from that. Our number is 721-1290, or you can make your comments on our Facebook page. We'll be right back. All right, this is Talkback. We are rocking right along here on the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Joining us in studio, Haley Smith. She's the founder of Lifting Hands International. Christina Atwood also joining us this morning. And John, I understand you had some Facebook comments you wanted to share.
Yeah, so some of these came in earlier in the show, so there will be a little backtracking. I'll try to cover it. We were talking about Syria and what was going on there early on in the program, and Cable said, don't forget about Turkey taking advantage of the situation to wipe out the Kurds in Syria and Iraq. It's such a mess over there. Someone has to help these people. It seems like an invasion by multiple nations, all targeting various differing groups for various nefarious reasons. Jeannie, and this is the one that Haley was kind of responding to earlier, she said, a man was on a TV program yesterday who studied the amount of money the U.S. has spent on the refugees. I can't remember the exact number, however, it was in the billions. It would have been better for a coalition of countries to contribute funds and set up refugee camps in the general area of conflict, as some have said. We need to take care of our veterans first, and to take a look at what is happening in Sweden. Actually, watch the videos if you don't believe the absolute chaos and mayhem that is happening there with many no-go zones where police will not go because it is so dangerous. Let's talk about that one. That's a viewpoint I think a lot of people have. They look at what happened in Europe with the refugee influx, and they feel like it might be hazardous if we had a similar one here in the United States. I guess my question for you is, is it similar? Let's talk about how refugee settlement on the ground in the U.S. is different if it isn't.
A year ago, if you left Syria and you had enough money, you could make it to Europe, like Germany or Netherlands, in 5 days. You could make it there. Any border checks? No. Any vetting? No. You could just walk in, and there you are. It's a little different here, guys. And the process here is not the same at all. And so if you look at Europe and what's happening and all these things, I mean, you have to even investigate that. There's lots of false news over there as well, not just here. So I'm going to hand this over to Christina, who is an expert in resettlement in the United States, to address this.
All right. Expert Christina, take the mic.
Could you give her yours?
Sure, I can give you her.
It's pretty worthless, so go ahead.
All right. Well, I think a lot of people, first and foremost, it'd be really important to talk about numbers. So the UN resettled 140,000 people last year into approximately 30 countries. So we're not talking about millions of people, and we don't border these countries where there's going to be camps in our area. So the U.S. settled just under 85,000 people. 85,000 people. We're talking about millions of people in Europe, but what we're talking about here is the United Nations program, and their whole goal is to help that less than 1% that are extra vulnerable. We're not going to be the solution here. We're not looking to bring over all the refugees that are overseas. This is about, this particular program, the one that we work with, is about helping those who are the very most vulnerable, because that's what we do as humans. We take care of other people.
Now, Christina, what organization do you work with?
I'm with Lifting Hands International as well.
You're with Lifting Hands, okay.
And I focus on local efforts. So we're in Phoenix, and we have approximately 4,000 that came last year. So we have 4 resettlement agencies. Here in Missoula, you only have 1. And we resettled families from 30 different countries approximately. And
how did you get involved with Lifting Hands in Phoenix?
So about a year ago, I was at the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations. And you know that things are bad in the world. You see things on the news. You're not sure what's true, what's correct. And I got to hear some testimonies of people and their experiences, and in particular, there was a group of nuns that were telling about what was going on in different regions, and it struck me very deeply. And as a mother, I came home and said, we've got to do something. Let's see what we can do here in our area to help those who have suffered so very much. And so Haley and I were able to form a partnership, and I did a lot of research in trying to understand what would be the most helpful in helping these people on the path to self-sufficiency. So what we do is we gather goods from the community and we set up the apartment. The refugees get between $900 and $1,100 per person one time, and it is supposed to resettle them in their 90 days. Well, if their rent is $750, that doesn't even cover their rent. And so you've got...
They have a deposit, too.
Right. So then the federal government also says that they have to have a bed and a couch and a table and chairs and all these items. And so what happens is they come and their caseworker says, hey, you had this money, but we spent it on these items that the government said you had to have, so sign off, all your money's gone. And so what we're doing is we're gathering donations in our community, and we're going out to set up these apartments, and it has been incredible to witness how our community has come together in a way I didn't think possible.
Now, this is the Phoenix community.
Yes. So we have people from the Jewish faith, Muslim faith, Christian faith, atheists, not political, every branch that you can imagine. And
just people.
Just people who care about people, who want to help people. And these people that are coming are the people that have suffered extreme, extreme hardships. And if they remain this 1%, they won't be able to live even within the camps. That vulnerable population, that's why we need them.
So, Christina, a question for you is, the people get resettled. They're coming from the most traumatic of situations. So what, if any, follow-up exists in terms of once you get them physically into an apartment, you get them set up where they're getting life's basic needs met, but what type of follow-up, if any, in terms of how you may deal with some of the psychological impact, both to the adults and particularly the children?
I think this is one of the biggest pieces that we need to address, and that is, if you do any reading, it's supposed to be community that's helping to help these people. And originally in the United States, it was churches that were bringing families over, and it wasn't until the Refugee Act was passed that the government became involved. Whereas before, it was churches sponsoring these people and bringing them over and helping them to assimilate and become independent once again.
Okay, so John, grab the mic. I know you have some Facebook stuff, then we have to go to a break.
Yeah, Elena has two questions. Her first is, I have, two questions. How much in federal grants does their profit Lifting Hands International get?
None.
And
Everything is private donations.
The second question is, what's your connection with the International Rescue Committee or any of the other 9 federal resettlement agencies?
Christina can get that one.
All right, so we actually go through the resettlement agencies. We have 4 in Phoenix, and they give us the information. All that we know ahead of time is the gender, where they're coming from, and their ages. And so we go through them to get that information and help set up that apartment. And then if the volunteers need to do some training because they want to have continued follow-up with these families, then they go through each.
You don't receive any funding, or do you receive funding from any of the agencies you're describing? Zero. So all private donations, no funding from the agencies, but you work in cooperation with them.
Exactly.
In fact, there is only one employee of Lifting Hands International. We have hundreds of volunteers, one employee that makes less than $25,000 a year.
Who's the employee?
Me.
We have the one.
Doesn't even qualify for filing federal taxes.
And we're going to come right back. So stay with us. We still have Jim. Was the only ones that left on the phone is Jim. He's most patient. We're going to come right back with a phone call from Jim. We promise, right after this. Okay, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Our guests in the studio include Haley Smith and Christina Atwood. They're with the Lifting Hands International Group. And I promised we'd take a call as soon as we got back. So let's go try to keep my word here. Let's get Jim on the line. Jim, first of all, thank you for your patience. What's on your mind?
You know, I have such a hard time with a lot of these people that want to do things internationally. When I see so many problems locally and in the United States, I mean, why can't they grab like a black family out of the ghetto and sponsor them to get jobs in the city with all of us? You know, why can't they do something here to do something good instead of bringing people from a 5th century countries that just want to change the way we do business here?
Okay, thanks for the call, Jim.
Answer me that.
Okay, go ahead. Haley.
Why don't you start something? Because all I did was fill out some paperwork and started a nonprofit. And we have volunteers. We only have volunteers. And so it's really easy to do it. If you're passionate enough about something, if you're passionate about getting a family out of a ghetto, you could start something. It's not that hard. And you can find supporters. Missoula seems like a really great city that have a lot of people who would be passionate about that. And you have to remember, we're not responsible for bringing people into the country. And we are only obliged to help the agencies that receive federal funds to do so.
Okay, so let's move on and get Jeannie on the line. Jeannie, you're on Talkback with our guests. Go ahead.
Excuse me. Yes, I did make some Facebook posts, and I did mention that the refugees, were costing billions of dollars as per a news report, and that report was on Fox, I believe, yesterday morning. And about the Swedish burnings, that was on Lou Dobbs last night on Fox also. And it showed videos of cars burning and riots. So that's my sources, and I thought I'd let everybody know.
Hey, Jeannie, since you're on the air, I noticed you said something, I don't know, probably that would maybe hurt somebody. You said In 20 to 30 years, these women will look back and see the errors of their ways, as I have done for my lack of misunderstanding of world affairs. So let me ask you, Jeannie, where do you think they've misunderstood? What have they misunderstood that they should look back and regret?
Well, I think this refugee problem is dangerous.
I do too, and so do they. That's why they're trying to stop it.
They're misunderstanding what's going on.
So what is it that you understand that they don't?
Just that this refugee problem is a huge problem.
Well, they're
it's
actually trying to
dangerous.
stop the
Sweden,
refugee
look at
problem.
Germany, And
We already established that the refugees that entered Europe entered without any vetting, and the borders were open, gaping open. People just walked in. It's different here. It's different.
No,
here.
it's not. No, it's not.
So how is it not different?
No, James Comey of the FBI said that the Syrians could not be vetted properly. They don't have the paperwork. They don't have the data to vet these people properly.
How many Syrians do we
not
take,
true.
though,
I'm sorry.
compared to Europe? How many Syrians?
So
does
I
the
think,
United
yes,
States
in
take?
20 or 30 years, you may look back at the errors of your ways, and I hope you don't feel bad about that.
Well, real quick,
Thank you.
Jeannie, while you're listening, now all the folks that you help through through Lifting Hands International are not from Syria, right? There's a mix.
Absolutely. We help them from all over the world.
So Jeannie's case only applies to Syria, is that right? That's the only thing that's
I
different.
spend a lot of time with the Syrian families in Phoenix. I speak Arabic, and they're lovely people, and they really appreciate what we do, and they love being in America.
Okay, Jeannie, thanks for the call.
I think these women would be. I think they would do a lot more good if they could go over to Syria and help set up some refugee camps.
I would,
If
but
that could be done.
aid convoys actually regularly get bombed there, so it would be a little too dangerous there. And I do spend most of my time abroad helping refugees that are in camps.
Well, what happens is a coalition of countries. I'm not, privy on everything that has to do with these refugee camps. But I believe, like a coalition of countries get together and establish a no-fly zone.
What you're proposing is a serious proposal that happened 6-7 years ago, and I mean, most famously, I remember John McCain advocating for this position, that we should have and establish a no-fly zone so that we could provide a secure area in Syria. The administration at the time, the Obama administration, and other countries didn't want to get involved. Nobody really wants to stick their hand in this mess, it seems like. And
We have a new president now.
Jeannie, can I please say something to you in terms, and this is something that I believe
this isn't Jeannie.
I thought that was, all right. Regardless, we people in the country, regardless of your political persuasion, your government has a responsibility to be able to provide accurate information as to what the process is, which is what our two guests are attempting to do in terms of making a differentiation as far as how stringent the refugee vetting process is. Is it perfect, especially when you're getting a country that is going through such a major dislocation like Syria, and you don't have information necessarily on everybody and their backgrounds? But the process of refugee vetting is years in the making before you get here. Will there be people that potentially could slip through? Yes. Could they do harm? Yes. Are they working on improving that process? I would say yes. But let's focus on the bigger picture of the differentiation between refugees and immigrants. And that's really what they're talking about.
One question
here.
for you, Gina, before I let you go, because we're up against a break. Do you have a problem at all with these folks going out and raising money for clothing and food and things like that for these refugees, or not?
Like I said, I just don't think refugees should be brought to the country. I think we should err on the side of caution. And I don't have any problem with them helping the refugees.
Jeannie, but you're talking about refugees coming from Islamic countries principally. Am I interpreting your statement in that way? Because refugees come from all over the world, not just Syria and several Middle Eastern countries. So are you
right now we're
specifically
dealing with
talking about
that
Islamic countries?
Area,
You're talking about Islamic countries, correct?
Well, she said Syria. Syria is the
Right.
one that's her biggest concern.
Right.
And
And
can
I
I
understand.
step back for a second?
Yeah.
I think she has a valid concern.
I
with
just
Syria.
acknowledged
just
that.
the
I
area,
just
like the
acknowledged
7
that. Yeah.
countries that they've been talking about.
Right.
you know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I need to acknowledge.
So I don't know. I guess we have a difference of opinion, but thank you for letting me air mine.
Right.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
Jeannie, and thank you for leading me into my break. So we're going to come right back. Sorry, I'm the commercial sheriff here. So we're going to come right back. We also have Leah and James. We're going to try to get as many calls as we can. We have about 18 minutes left in the show. So if you want to comment, give us a call. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. The Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Joining us here, Bob Sergeant Schwartz with us, Haley Smith and Christina Atwood, both from Lifting Hands International. And let's get another call in here real quick. This is Leah. Leah, thank you for holding. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, and I wanted to thank the ladies for coming on and the compassion that they show. I have a question about the clothing. They said that they needed specifically more men's clothing. Do they have a drop-off here?
No, we don't. We're just visiting for the conference this weekend. But,
Okay.
Christina?
I'm sorry. Hang on just a second. Yeah, grab John's microphone.
We have a Amazon wish list that things can be purchased and shipped directly to us to go into shipping containers. There is containers with drop-offs in Utah.
Yep.
And also in the Phoenix area.
Yeah, we have items on that wish list that are as cheap as like $10. They get sent to a drop-off point or warehouse in Utah, and then we collect the items in Utah, and then we send them to these the camps in Lebanon and Jordan. The camps
I would
that
imagine
have 80,000 people in them, and they're desperate. And there are clothing items on that. Yep.
I would imagine that there are places here in Missoula like the Salvation Army or the, for instance, the Peace Center, Jeanette Rankin Peace Center. I'm sure if they had your information and people gave donations, they might try to get the information, the items to you.
The International Rescue Committee is also headquartered. There's a office here.
Okay.
And maybe they take those donations as well. Thank
You know, it's crazy in America. We always hear about the overabundance of food. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know what I'm talking about, the stuff that hits the dumpster after the day's over. But, you know, I used to work also in a secondhand shop. And there's just so many clothes that, you know, we throw away or get rid of for some reason or another that could easily go to a better cause.
Okay, let's continue on and get back to the phone. Thank you for your call. And let's see, this is James. James, you're up next on Talkback. Go ahead.
Hey, I want to start off just saying, you know, you ladies are doing a good job. I think this is commendable, and you're showing compassion. And I'm an extremely conservative person, and I'm very, you know, I have my own concerns like anyone else about the refugee programs, but one of those is that when we look at things in a defensive way and we start to just let our fears take over, then we lose the compassion and we forget that there's another side to it, and there are people that need help, and there's a happy medium, and these ladies have it, and they're working to address that. And on top of that, I think when they're working locally to help settle refugees, that adds to the vetting process because we know where they are, we know who's receiving materials. It's not just somebody blindly thrown loose in the country. You know, they're getting help, they're registering. We know, you know, that's just another way of monitoring. And, you know, I think a lot of callers that call in show a side of us that is forgetting that compassion.
All right. Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, wait, I don't want to go yet. I have a suggestion.
Go ahead.
I have
There's
a
more.
suggestion.
Okay.
This has been on my mind a while. I tried to work with my son to make it an Eagle Scout project, but it didn't fit the bill. And then we tried to do it as
We love Eagle Scouts.
Well, we also tried to set up a thing as a senior project, but it wasn't career-related, and I'm sure we could have tweaked it, but this is a suggestion, and you could maybe use it to go remotely into other towns and stuff, but just in Missoula, the Missoula area alone, using Craigslist, on multiple occasions I've kept track of just the free stuff that people give away. And over a 3-month period, usually between 60 and 90 days, I have literally found free every appliance and piece of furniture that a family could possibly need.
Great idea.
And, you know, if there was somebody volunteering or a group of people and we had a place to store it, literally every couple of months, or 3 at the most, I'd say, you could completely furnish a house.
Just go pick it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that saves them.
You just need the means to get it and have a place to store it so that when somebody comes in that's ready for it.
James, you're
It's just
hired.
a matter of moving. I just, I'm
Employee
like
number 2.
everybody else. I'm like, oh, how do I make the time for that? But it would, if you had a lot of people on board like you guys are doing in Arizona, then maybe as a community, when somebody's like, dang, I got this extra bed and I want to get rid of it, I'm kind of tired of it being in my garage, and you say, hey, we have a place you can put it, it'll probably get there pretty quick.
That is a brilliant idea. Thank
James,
you.
thank you so much. And we have a 1-minute timeout, and I'm not sure if we're going to get more calls in. We'll try. We have Dave, Chris, and Grace. We're coming back after this 1-minute timeout. Stay with us. We're back. This is Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. That's Bob Seidenschwartz over there. Has got the microphone. Go, Bob.
Yeah, I just got to say this real quick. Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the Doubletree, the Montana World Affairs Council, with participation from the Cutter Foundation International, is going to be sponsoring our 2 speakers here. So please, I ask the public, if you want to come out and enjoy this conversation, want to learn more, that starts at 7 at the Doubletree on Thursday.
Cool. All right. So let's move on. Let's try to get a couple more calls in. I believe this is Dave. Is this your second shot, Dave?
Yeah, from what I've read about
Real quick.
From refugees, from what I've read about them, they would rather stay in country. It became a choice between living and dying. That's why they're coming here.
Thanks for your call.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true. They don't want to leave. They want to go home, and they can't because their home does not exist anymore.
Okay, let's get Chris on the line. Chris? Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
There was a really important thing that was said off air by Haley earlier about the home not being there anymore and your personal contact you had with one of the refugees you worked with. I was hoping you could tell that story real quick.
Yeah, one of the refugee families that I'm really good friends with in Phoenix, he sat me down after a few times I had spent some time with family. He said, watch this. He pulled up a YouTube video, and the video is his entire hometown, all these bodies being bulldozed into a mass grave. And then he pointed to one, he said, that's my brother. And he started crying. I started crying. The whole family starts crying. We all start hugging. And
the statement, you can't go home again, has a different meaning when your whole town has been destroyed.
And this happens a lot in Syria, that most of the country has been destroyed. You look at pictures, videos, you can even just look up on YouTube drone footage from Russian jets or whatever. It's very, very bad. It's destroyed. You can't go back.
So even if they did go back, they'd have to start building from scratch, right?
Oh, yeah. It's going to take, I read an estimate, it's going to take hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild the infrastructure of Syria after this war.
Okay. That's okay, Chris. Go ahead, Chris. You're on Talkback.
Okay. Hey, I find it funny you speaking of hometowns destroyed. I'm not from Missoula. Many people here in Missoula are pretty naive to the migrants and everything. I've noticed that none of them respect us after we bring them over here and give them all this stuff. My hometown in Georgia has been destroyed by the migrants themselves, the immigrants themselves. They've taken over complete whole areas. They walk around in gangs where people are afraid to walk up and down the streets, and that's here in America.
Are you talking about? But we're talking about refugees, sir. Are you talking about?
I'm talking about the immigrants and refugees because, and by the way, the refugee problem. The whole point of refugees is bring them over here, give them safety, and then send them back. Is there any plan to send any of them back?
That's not the point.
After you give them all this stuff.
Okay.
And people here, and also I see the Muslims at night at the nightclubs walking around in groups, 2, 3, maybe 4, trying to pick up on girls and stuff.
All right.
And they do the same thing in Europe too.
Okay, Chris.
Good luck on patting yourself on the back and feeling good, flooding this country up with all these people who don't respect none of us.
Okay, Chris, we're going to let you. We got several more callers. Thanks. You've made your point. We appreciate it. So, anybody want to respond? Go ahead.
Well, I don't pat myself on the back. A lot of the refugees have expressed a lot of gratitude for what we do. I have a lot of personal relationships with them. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and they don't come in enough concentration to walk around in gangs. Refugees and immigrants are different things. We have different categories. We've already gone over that.
This is a serious question, though, that the caller brought up that other people have referenced. The idea that the refugees are always a drain on society. What do refugees do once they're established in a community?
I can tell you that almost...
This is Christina, by the way. Go ahead.
Almost all of them have jobs within the 90 days. Most of them are immediately. And their whole goal is to be self-sufficient at 90 days. So what we're doing is we're giving them that jump start with the little tiny bit of capital that they receive, and then they're on their own. And so this is about welcoming them into the community. And what's been extraordinary is we see lots of Eagle Scouts. We see people who have different skills, and And I think it changes perceptions, and it gives these people that are coming hope and recognizing that there is community and people around them and that they can start a new life. These are people that cannot be reestablished back home because of the vulnerabilities that they have. So the plan is never to send them back where they came from. But we're talking about a very, very small population of the refugees, less than 1%.
Okay, go ahead, Haley. Did you want to comment?
No, I'm just
Okay.
looking at
All right, let's
the
try to get one more call in if we can. We have 2 minutes left in the show. Grace, quickly, what's on your mind?
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the work that you are doing and for your patience and really graciousness in responding to callers like the last one, who I think have a really thinly veiled fear and I mean, if you want to see gangs of dudes walking around looking to assault women, go no further than downtown Missoula on a Friday or Saturday night, right? So when it comes down to it, we're really talking about people who are fleeing for their lives. And earlier, you both were treated with a great deal of skepticism for the fact that you do this work for no pay or for very, very low pay, and that most of the work is volunteer and you're not somehow kind of living high off the hog on government grants. And neither are the refugees. They must be self-sufficient after a very short period of time. And so I think you're bringing those facts to light and dealing with people who treat you with disrespect and skepticism, as well as treat the refugees with far worse than that. I just really, my head is off to you, and I'm very, very grateful for the work that you're doing, as well as for Soft Landing here in Missoula.
Thanks for your
Thank
call.
you.
Appreciate
Thank you,
that. So we have about a minute left. I want to give this last minute to you guys just to state your case and tell us more, again, when the seminar is. Bob? Go ahead.
Just very quickly, it's Thursday evening at the Doubletree starting at 7 o'clock. We're expecting a rather large turnout, so seating is going to be limited. And very quickly for me, I embrace Chris's comments. We're not going to get people's minds and hearts changed by alienating people at viewpoints through education, through exposing what facts are versus what feelings are. Hopefully, we get a few people at least stepping back.
Well, that's what this forum is supposed to be all about, is for people, to state their case and try to do it in a civil way, and then people get to respond. So there you go. So, Haley, go ahead. You have like 30 seconds.
Yeah, tomorrow night I'm going to provide some of the context of the international refugee camp scenes that the refugees are coming from and how difficult it is not only to flee your country but also spend time in refugee camps where you know that you're being taken advantage of in lots of ways.
Real quickly, how can people contact your organization?
LiftingHandsInternational.org is our website. You can just email us at info@liftinghandsinternational.org.
Right.
We have Instagram and Facebook,
Right.
and we welcome any emails. Yeah.
Thanks to both of you. John, what's coming up on tomorrow's fabulous show?
Oh, well, it's a mix of open phones and extra guests. We'll be hearing about a business grant here in Missoula.
Have a good day, everybody. We will talk to you tomorrow.
So great.